Welcome back. It's the Fetch Inside the Eye Live, intelligent media for the politically aware. Just want to say real quickly, chat room is still kind of dead today, man. What's going on with you guys over there? But anyways, it's open still. It's at InsideTheEyeLive.com. Click on that live chat button. Joining us now in the virtual studio, actually coming from, I believe, Wales is where he's at. He'll correct us if I'm wrong. And he is a writer and a contributor. His website is called, first his name, Brett Redmayne-Titley. He's got a website called watchingromeburn.uk. He is an independent journalist. He's known as being one of these guys that goes out there on the spot, visits the locations, the on-location, but basically is on-location reporting. He's contributed to, get this, Global Research, Un's Review, Southfront, Asia Times, Zero Hedge, China Rising, Strategic Culture Foundation, Off Guardian, the Greenville Post, don't know those guys, Mint Press News, Fars News Agency, Russia Insider, State of the Nation, Dissident Voice, Veterans Today, Activist Post, Earth First, and quite a few more. And without further ado, and he's actually a former columnist, by the way, for Press TV in Iran. And without further ado, joining us now, I believe from Wales, Brett. Hi, Brett. Welcome back to Inside the Eye Live.
Hello, Dennis. How are you? Nice to be with you again.
Yeah, it's good. I know, Brett, if you guys were listening about 3 to 4 weeks ago, we had some technical issues. We only got about a half hour in, and a lot of people saying, hey, that was a pretty good show, man. Too bad it happened. But, Brett, you made a kind of a splash, which is great, obviously, in the radio business. And welcome back. We don't normally bring people back so soon, but it's due to the circumstances, it's okay. So first, welcome back.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I'm glad to be back with you. Yeah, it was kind of interesting the last time, but I'm sure we'll make up for lost time now.
Yeah, we will certainly. Generally, we do that type of thing. Not just knock on our shoulders here. Anyways, let's real quick. Going back, I kind of get what you do now. I was kind of in the dark, and you can still correct me further, or we can just let you explain in your own words. But I believe what you do a lot is you actually go out into the field. I don't know how you fund that, by the way, but you go out into the field and you're basically doing reporting from location. That's kind of your forte. Is that kind of correct?
Yeah, it's sort of old world journalism. I mean, that's how it used to be done. One of the nice things is it becomes rather undeniable what you're reporting when you're actually there. As you're aware, we have a lot of sort of keyboard warriors out there. A lot of them do very, very good work. But they don't venture out beyond their office. So therefore, they're a little bit limited on their garnering information. I find that the best story is on the streets. I've released a number of great articles over the years where I literally got the story from the people who trusted me and I had met while covering the story, and who provided me, interesting snippets of the big story to provide to my readers.
Yeah, what's interesting is being here in the Middle East, I've had access to very senior level people. I mean, senior. But you can't pass yourself off as a journalist, because if you do, they're going to say, why are you here on this visa? I mean, literally, I've had intelligence people talk to me and say, Dennis, you're like a journalist. You should be on a journalist visa. How do you get by that? Obviously, I say, no, I'm not. I'm just a weekend warrior podcaster, guys. I'm not trying to get information, and I'm not, right? But these are concerns that you probably know about because you go out in the field and have to deal with these issues. Have you ever had to deal with some of these issues, like in immigration, where they're saying, hey, look, you're a journalist. This is not the way you're supposed to enter. Go back, redo your visa, this type of thing. Have you ever had anything like that happen to you?
Oh, sure. It's called Israel. I've tried to get into Israel and Palestine for years. They're not going to let me in because I'm going to tell the truth about what I see. If you're co-opted and you're part of the mainstream media organization, sure, they'll let you in because then they can control what you're going to write. The opposite, though, has been true, and I think we got into that a little bit before we were interrupted on the last interview, whereby, I was down in southern Lebanon heading for the Lebanese-Palestinian border. They would call that the Israeli border, but you'll find that all the signs pointing southbound say Palestine on them for historically good reasons. But I was able to get in after many hours of being checked by the Lebanese army, that I was who I represented to be. They were very much on pins and needles that day because one of the senior members of Hamas had been blown up in his car in Sidon, and I happened to see that. I was passing through Sidon within hours of that taking place. So they were very jaundiced about letting anybody down there. And if you have the first thing they do is they take your passport, and if you have an Israeli stamp in your passport, you're not going anywhere. That's for sure. Correct. So, if you will, it's sort of pro and con. Some of it restricts me from getting into areas that I would like to go in, and then sometimes I get in, as I said, because of the respectability of my work.
Now, obviously, going into South Lebanon would be, for me, a coup. I have been to Lebanon. I have met with some of the top Christian side of the security establishment, not the Hezbollah side. And I remember talking in a meeting with the Christian side, and I mentioned Hezbollah, and you could just see him kind of grimace and, adjust his figure, his shape on the chair, like, I don't want to be dealing with this. We're not really big Hezbollah fans, I should say. But what's the most difficult job you've ever done as far as get in and report from, risk of danger to your life or whatever? Let's just say call it an adrenaline rush, if not a danger. But what would you consider your highest adrenaline rush? And you know what I mean by that, I'm sure, in your field. What have you done?
Yeah, well, that's part of it. I mean, there is an adrenaline rush, but quite frankly, I don't go running around in gunfire. I find there to be no story there. When I was in Ukraine, I certainly could have done that. I was given offers to do it. I failed to see what the story actually was. However, the geopolitical issues, as you kind of pointed out, they come from the people that you can speak with, whether that be on the ground or politicians themselves or whomever. So the story really exists with the people, not on the ground. And like I said, gunfire is just, that's for the heroes of the world, and I'm not one of those. Interestingly enough, the most dangerous story I ever did was back when I was just starting out as a journalist, and that was in South Texas, when I was covering the Keystone XL pipeline down there. And there was a lot of activism down there trying to stop it. I'm very much an activist journalist, so I was involved and embedded with the activists down there, as I tend to do. But the police down there are sacrosanct. They do bury people in shallow graves if you're not very, very careful. And I was being followed the entire time by a small white car that, when I would approach it, always left and then came back. So they knew who I was. That is one of the troubles right now, is most news services or intelligence services do know who I am, pro or con. I don't think I'm a big threat to them, but they do watch carefully to what I do. But no, in South Texas, that was an area where the police had been hired by TransCanada to basically police the protesters. And the police were extremely dangerous down there. And as such, I had to be extraordinarily careful of my movements down there. I've really, in being in Turkey and in Lebanon, other places like that, I've never really worried for my own safety because I'm a pretty savvy traveler and I keep myself out of that kind of problem. In South Texas, that problem was coming my way daily. So I had to be extremely careful and was fortunate enough to get out of there with any kind of incident. Because unfortunately, some of my contemporaries down there did run afoul of the police and it did not go well for them.
Yeah, I'll tell you a fun story. I'll steal a little of your time. I was in the Philippines and I was there with people with Air Estrada. And it was a telecom deal. I'm more on the business side of things, but the politicos kind of sometimes use me, right? So they told me, Dennis, there's a lot of turmoil. This one, there was the attempt to get Air Estrada out of power, right? So there's huge protests, bricks are flying, gas, tear gas, fires, you name it. And I went out to watch. I stayed on the side, but I went to watch, right? So I get back to L.A., and they said, Dennis, we told you not to go out, man. I mean, if you were kidnapped, what are we going to do? It's not that easy. And so they told me they want a report, right? So I gave them like a page-and-a-half report the next day. And after I gave them the report, this was back in the dot matrix days. You know what they did? They took from their files a dot matrix file, right? Because it's continuously printed. They had a 13.5-page dot matrix print of me, everything I did the entire trip. And you want to talk about an eye-opener about what the intelligence services can do. That will open your eyes.
Well, very much so. In fact, when on my Lebanese trip, you can read one of my articles on that speaks to that. I have the respectability with Hezbollah. I met, Hezbollah commanders. Was down on the border with a Hezbollah commander as well. Interviewed a very senior commander from the 2006 war, very surreptitiously in a coffee shop in the back room. And what was interesting in that story is, as I brought up, is, in meeting with that gentleman, I had to go through, layers of, shall we say, security, and was basically brought to a coffee shop, I guess that was under their control, was brought into the back room. And I was thinking I was meeting with the gentleman who was with me at the time. That gentleman actually left, handed me a manila envelope, and said, there'll be someone to see you shortly. That turned out to be the contact, the senior Hezbollah commander. What they had given me was a U.S. State Department dossier on me. I was not allowed to keep it, but it was some very entertaining reading while I was waiting for the other gentleman to arrive. And I can tell you that my jaw dropped on how much they knew about what I had been doing that day. So, I'm no threat to the U.S. State Department because I'm a nonviolent journalist. I preach nonviolence, although I preach activism and collective activism. That's, if you will, the weapon that I choose to use, along with my pen. But it was very enlightening to have them, present to me, if you will, as a present, what they had garnered through their own sources and allow me to read it.
Yeah, that would have been pretty phenomenal. Also, I know I've had mukhabarat, the term mukhabarat, come up to me and say, we like you, dude. You're one of the few Americans that actually tells it like it is. We wish more Americans were like you, because you're not being what is the term they used? Disrespectful. You're just saying it like it really is. So there is an audience for people like you, Brett, that just gets out there and tells the story and is fair with the story. And I think that's the key to your success, is that you're fair.
Yeah, well, thank you. I like to think so as well. And certainly the Lebanese army made that very clear when they gave me the pass to go, continue on down to the Lebanese border. There is only one truth in this world. They would like you to believe that there's multiple truths, but that's just obfuscation of the real truth. So, my work, like I said, becomes somewhat undeniable because I'm there. I tend to write with a lot of power and passion. I'm a wordsmith. I know the power of words, the power of sentences, the power of paragraphs. And I try to do that to solicit a reaction from the reader, hopefully a positive reaction, if not at least a degree of empathy for my subject matter. So I think I've managed to be reasonably successful in an old school way of doing things, because quite frankly, this was done for many years. I mean, you can go back to people like John McPhee, Hunter Thompson, Graham Greene, the list kind of goes on. And of course, they are my heroes. So I kind of emulate what they managed to do in their own way. But the effect and power of their work really came from being very good writers, but also from going to the scene and having the minutiae of the story to to be able to be presented to the reader or of what they're presenting. And of course, that can't be done, like I said, without actually going there.
Yeah, that's true. With the recent developments now, especially with the U.S. opening up back to Russia, certainly that looks like it's going to be a major push to reestablish ties between the two powers, which for me is an actually brilliant thing to do. I don't see why we should be enemies of Russia, frankly. What's your opinion now of the quick turn this week with Zelensky taking on Trump and Trump absolutely lashing right back? This guy's basically a failed comedian turned dictator.
Well, I mean, we could see, I think those of us who have followed the Russian issue for the last 3 years saw all of this coming in slow incremental pieces. I think at this point, Zelensky would do very well to look at the historical issue of the Kurds, who have come back into play thanks to Mr. Erdogan and his continued duplicity as well. Basically, they're hanging, Zelensky and Ukraine out to dry now. They're pulling out the American financial impetus. They've taken away the ability of Ukraine to hang on to the dream of joining NATO. And as such, people like Keir Starmer have had to pick up the pieces, but good luck with that. I mean, these are countries that have also been cast adrift, much similar to the Kurds, if you will, by America that use them. Look at Nord Stream just for one example. I mean, Olaf Scholz actually saying that the Russians have blown up their own pipeline. I mean, nobody believed that in the slightest, not even the German people, which would basically like to vote him out of office tomorrow morning if they could. The same is going on in France, Spain, basically Western Europe, where the population has known that this has been a house of cards, that, the Ukraine has been a pack of lies, that their politicians have lied on behalf of the Americans. But now the Americans are pulling out and leaving Europe to fend for themselves as far as Ukraine is concerned. Zelensky is a dead man walking. He has been for a long time. That's why he doesn't spend a lot of time in Ukraine. He spends it outside, soliciting.
Isn't it funny, real quick? How Trump basically kind of told, listen, maybe you should fly back to Paris. He told him straight up, maybe you need to go to Paris, dude.
Well, that's where his wife's been. I actually, when I was in Ukraine, was with a group of mercenaries that actually extracted Zelensky's children from Ukraine and took them out through Warsaw. So I know a lot about what was taking place and the corruption that was taking place for the, shall we say, the upper class of Ukraine to maintain their status and influence while the rest of the country suffered. And that's continued, with Blinken demanding more troops from Ukraine to be brought to the front lines. If you saw the story this week, they're actually gutting their intelligentsia and their pilot group and their communications group and sending them to the front lines too. It begs the question, how many Ukrainians will be around here shortly? And, as such, I think when you look at people like Vladimir Klitschko, who is certainly a nationalist, I'm a big boxing fan. I think he's a great, he has a legacy within boxing. But I think his allegiance is directly to Ukraine, pro or con. I think he's maybe not as enlightened as he might be, but he does believe in Ukraine and does believe that, the Ukrainian war is not being prosecuted in the proper fashion. Zelensky from outside the country is keeping himself away from people like Klitschko while he continues just to send everybody to the front lines and demand more money from the West. Now, of course, that money is drying up very quickly because it's, Europe is broke, basically, like America is broke. Trump saying that he wants to pull money back has nothing really to do with Ukraine. He's trying to increase his impetus as a president and try to do something for the country. I would argue that America is far beyond that now and has no money in which to propagate its success. But in the meantime, Zelensky and company are being hung out to dry. I think that's appropriate. As I'm sure you know, the UN has stated very clearly that Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world and has proved to be in the last 3 years. The GAO report of about a year ago showed that literally billions of dollars are missing, and we can only speculate who got those billions of dollars. Zelensky being one of the primary suspects, of course.
Yeah. We only have like 6 minutes in this, 7 minutes in this segment. I got 2 issues I want to get to before we move on to the next segment, the next half hour. And the first one is, aren't we when you look at U.S. foreign policy today with the Trump versus Biden, in your opinion, my opinion it is, but in your opinion, isn't this the first time we've ever witnessed such a sea change of foreign policy based on the ideological differences of a presidency? Now, there's absolutely no attempt at continuity anymore, that we are looking at a clean ideological break from the previous American regime?
I don't think so. Trump had 4 years to propagate very similar strategies, talking about placating Russia, which he didn't manage to do, talking about changing the nation, which he didn't manage to do. Trump is very, I wouldn't say skilled. I was in the Trump press corps for 2016 campaign. I've seen Trump. I consider him a blithering idiot. However, he does have a sort of gravitas when it comes to stating things that he knows will never take place, and then blaming everyone around him for the fact that he couldn't fulfill his platform, and then moving on. Or if he does actually affect the success, then he takes credit for it. But basically, he blames everyone else for his own foibles. When you look at Trump's current cabinet, although it's a different cabinet than 4 years ago, it's still structurally the same thing. These are all Zionists, all propagating the big business, ultra military aspects of the American economy, and really don't care at all for the American citizen at all. Now, sadly, the American citizen is dull as a bread knife and really doesn't understand its own political system to any great degree. So they're easily manipulated by soundbite politics, such as what Trump is very skilled at doing. When you talk about Trump's advent at this point in time, I think you have to now wait and see what will be brought to fruition in subsequent months, if not years. It's one thing to say that there's been a sea change. Okay, there's been a sea change offered, but nothing has been completed at all. I mean, we do have J.D. Vance, pontificating at what was it, Treblinka this last week, which is de rigueur for every American politician across the board. But I think that speaks very poorly for American foreign policy, because it's going to continue to be Israeli foreign policy, not American foreign policy. And there should be a big difference in that. Trump is saying there's a difference between the two, but functionally so far there's not. So, so to claim that, that Trump is affecting a sea change, only time will tell.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Now you kind of blew my hole there. It's okay, man. That's what's great about this show. I just saw a sea change in what's happening between the former administration, meaning Biden, and what's happening with Ukraine. I mean, it looks like we're just going to nuke Ukraine at this stage.
Well, I would argue that Trump coming back into power had, I think, very little to do with American ethnocentrism and more to do with America's dissatisfaction with the Biden regime and its LGBT, woke world, DEA kind of philosophy, which, of course, it was propagating very specifically. I mean, if you look here in California, which, by the way, I'm in San Diego at the moment, not Wales. Oh, but if you look at, good old Gavin Newsom, our governor Brill Cream, he was making it illegal for parents to police their own children at a young age regarding LGBT issues. Now, this was sort of a national proposition, but it didn't go over very well with the parents for obvious reasons. They should have the right to police their children. I mean, these are kids who are 10, 11, 12 years old that can't buy alcohol, yet they can somehow get transgender surgery and have it being restricted from their parents' knowledge, And this is just one example, but if you look at the bigger issue within the Biden administration, you had a lot of this going on. You look at it in the military. Trump is now doing something about the transgender groups within the military. I wouldn't say that I necessarily agree with that, because there's transgender groups in the military in Sweden and in Norway, et cetera, and they exist very, very well. However, within the military, you had military leadership taking the position of LGBT and standing up before the cameras in a dress. I mean, this doesn't go very big in the world population of, traditional military members who are generals, colonels, what have you, that came up through the ranks in a standard misogynist style of militarism. So once again, I'm not defending that, but it's functionally true that a good portion of America was sick and tired of the Biden administration, and I would argue that was more societal than it was in terms of foreign policy by far.
Yeah, that's probably true. U.S. citizens, unfortunately, are not adept at the foreign side of things. Next issue, then, and this should cover it to the end of the segment, is the Ukraine war obviously ending. It's going to be a major geopolitical event. I mean, maybe another year, 2 years, we don't know. What do you think is going to be happening? Just put your kind of like your hat on there and say what's going to be happening with, I guess, the U.S., Putin, and then what happens to Europe in this fallout?
Ooh, that's a big subject, and one I could spend a lot of time talking about. Like I said, they've been cast adrift by the Americans, so they're going to have to pick up the pieces. But those pieces are pretty far and wide. I mean, you have economies that have been shattered. You have Ukraine that's been destroyed utterly. You have a political system in Ukraine that will have to rise from its own ashes, and we don't know where that's going to arise. Like I said, will Zelensky even be alive to pick up the pieces, or will it be, members of the military such as Klitschko and others? Then you look at the fact that BlackRock's already moved into Ukraine, looking at how to pick up the pieces in a Zionist manner to expand Greater Israel as well. It's very speculative on where this is going to go, but the collateral damage is European wide. It's also throw Britain in on it as well. I mean, you've got as an example, Keir Starmer took away the heating allowance for the old age pensioners in Britain and shifted that money very publicly to Ukraine to continue the war effort, and then told Britons that he was a strong leader because he had to make difficult decisions. That went over like a lead balloon in Wales, in Britain. Like, as you know, I live in Wales part of the time, so I'm very familiar with British politics. But the Brits are as disenfranchised from their own political system as the Americans are, and they're suffering the similar consequence of seeing their economy, degrade, further and further down, in keeping to propagate, the military efforts that the majority of the British politicians want to keep going. That's going to change, though, I think, now with the Americans pulling out, although this week, once again, Starmer said that he wanted to take the leadership position instead of the Americans. This is not going very well for Starmer. I mean, he's got a massive recall against him. I don't think that's going to go very far, but it's something like 5 million people to see him brought out of office.
Brett, we're going into the break. All right. We'll be right back with
listen to Revolution Radio. All
right, everybody. Welcome back. It's the Fetch. Got to get that echo out of there. It's the Fetch Inside the Eye Live, intelligent media for the politically aware, again, right here on Revolution Radio at revolution.radio. Listener-sponsored and supported radio. We do appreciate all you do to keep the network alive, up and running, keeping shows like this on the air, which is always a good thing. And, again, we appreciate what you can do. Make your way over to revolution.radio and find a way to make some contribution to the effort here to keep, again, independent media alive. Our guest today in San Diego is Brett Redmayne-Titley. He's a basically on location type of journalist. He actually goes out, covers geopolitical issues, contributes to many forums like State of the Nation, and I'm just going to go off the top of my head, Russia Insider. I liked Russia Insider back when it first came out, by the way, and quite a few others, State of the Nation, quite a few. You can go to his website at Brett. Go ahead. I think it's watchingromeburn.uk. Is that it?
That's right. Watchingromeburn.uk, not .com. Yes, sir.
Yeah, .uk. Yes. All right. Very good. Watchingromeburn.uk. So make your way over. And also, Brett, you have a Substack. If you want to give that address out real quick so we get it in before we lose the segment here.
Yeah, it's just my last name, Redmayne-Titley at Substack.
Okay, that'd be everybody. REDMAYN-TITLEY. I guess .substack.
That's right. Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, I'm going to get into. We want to cover, I guess, some of the medical side of America. Is that correct, Brett? Is that I understand it from the communications?
Yeah, you'd like to, Dennis. I think it's another example. Getting away from foreign policy issue. Of political control. If you know my work, as perhaps you do a little bit, I've written a lot about Zionism, but I hold a different view of Zionism. I consider it to be much more broad-based than merely territorial expansion by Israel, which we've got plenty to discuss on that issue as well. But Zionism has moved into being societal within all the facets of society now, and has degraded all those facets, I would argue, as I have. So moving beyond that theory, it's moved itself into the medical profession. And sadly, I'm battling with cancer now. I'm not looking for sympathy here. I just my situation happens to be germane to the subject. And from being an on-scene journalist, I've been on-scene on this particular subject as well, because of my situation. What I've come to recognize is that American healthcare is myopic. It has only one way of dealing with cancer, since that's the subject, and it is incorrect in the way that it's doing it. It is not, as we know in American healthcare, there is no money spent on prevention. It's spent presumably on a cure. Well, cancer is very difficult to cure, and in my view, there is no protocols in Western medicine to actually cure cancer, much less prevent it. And these are the things that I've come to terms with myself. But from being an investigative journalist, I had to turn my own investigation towards my own issues. And this is where I started finding out that, integrative medicine, if you will, is not embraced by the West at all. If anything, it's hidden because, my research was very difficult to find in my own, for my own best interests. I go through this a lot with my other work where I'll have a memory of something I'd like to present in writing, and then I can't find it in Google. I have Alzheimer's here, or is somebody burying this thing? And I have alternate sources, and almost always I find the information, but it's under layers of obfuscation. Well, this was very true applied to cancer. There is protocols out there in alternative medicine that do have efficacy against cancer. I have one of the worst ones, pancreatic cancer. But cutting to the chase, right now I am stable. I'm in what's called stable remission, knock on wood, which I have to do constantly. But my situation is static because of my investigation and the things that I found, and I've been able to move my situation into an alternative field with really good doctors who actually care about the patient rather than profit. Because one of the big problems in Western medicine is everyone's looking for profit. And when it comes to alternative medicine, you're dealing with a lot of supplements and individual medications that can't be patented. And because they can't be patented, there's no potential for gigantic profit. You see this now with Jobs and Musk and Trump. blathering on about yet another mRNA vaccine to be used collectively against America's huge epidemic of cancer. If you drive the freeways in America right now, you will see new hospitals being built as we speak, with new beds for new cancer patients, basically. Yet once again, no one's really looking at a cure for this. They're looking at really propagating the problem.
Yeah, if we can, let's step back a bit. I want to share a quick story. Back in the 1990s when DSHEA, the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act came out, I think 1994, 96, something like that, we saw the rise of the vitamin and health supplement industry, which was, you saw companies like Natrol and Weider Nutrition, Liner Health, and all of these companies started to rise. I was actually selling products to these guys, and I worked with a Taoist grandmaster who had his own formulas that basically could cure quite a lot of things. We actually gave some of these supplements to the buyers at these companies in an effort to try to, try it. You'll see what we mean. And we would mask it with like chondroitin sulfate or something else to try to sell the other thing, which we didn't really need the chondroitin sulfate. We just tried to do it. But what he told me once, I went up to meet with him, and he's a Korean guy. He said, listen, Dennis, we can actually do a lot with our Taoist medicine, but if we actually do, they'll kill us. That's literally what he said. I mean, we can't. We just can't. They'll kill us. So who knows? And then you have, stories like some say it's like illegal to cure cancer. And I think maybe they're talking about the Cancer Act in the UK of 1939, where what you're alluding to is that they've set it up so well that it's almost impossible for people to even speak about curing or having alternative answers. And that's kind of what you're running up against. Is that not correct?
Oh, very much so. There's no money in a cure unless they can come up with a collective cure. But cancer's not that way. It really can't be treated on a collective basis. So, this becomes part of the trouble. They're trying to propagate a business model that basically makes its money by having you die slowly, because on the way out to dying, there'll be other treatments and other protocols, but they all come with a huge cost involved. As I pointed out in a recent article, just because I have very good insurance, I'm very blessed in that way, but we do get the bills. I've just had 14 rounds of chemo in 2 different schedules. They were $12,500 for each individual chemo session.
That's you travel. I mean, the medical industry in America has to be one of the least efficient at delivering, across the board. I mean, that sounds absolutely insanely expensive.
Well, and once again, you can only speculate how much profit is involved in that $12,500. But by example, within the protocols that I've gravitated to through my investigation, they're based out of Switzerland and Greece. Like I said, I'm knock on wood again. I'm having a degree of success here. I've got about $6,000 into that so far. And I'm having success, whereas basically the U.S. model was one of just delaying the inevitable, if you will, with more chemo, more surgery, more adjuncts, et cetera, all at an exorbitant fee. So if you look at just the single example of one of the 14 chemo schedules costing $12,500, yet what I've got out of my own pocket, because insurance won't cover this, of course, that's part of the plot. Insurance keeps everything moving towards the Western model by not subsidizing and paying for the alternative medicine. I've got about $6,000 into that. That's half of one chemo treatment. That of course doesn't get into my my surgeries and all that. Now, in fairness to Western medicine, some of this stuff did need to be done. It was a standard protocol. It is, in other words, removing the tumor. It has to be done. Therefore, a surgery. I was blessed to have some of the best oncologists in the world working on me by virtue of my affiliations at UCSD. But this was all part of the story because I've got some of the best in the world giving me the best in the world advice. And quite frankly, their advice is extremely skewed towards the Western model with complete ignorance, complete willful ignorance of integrative medicine and alternative medicine opportunities. So the myopic nature of this continues to propagate the problem, rather than bringing in the other side of this. What I found was interesting is as I moved towards integrative medicine, The integrative doctors that I spoke with were happy to embrace the Western model as part and parcel of what they were offering. On the other side, the Western oncologists refused to even consider it. It's absolutely witchcraft in their view, and they're not going to include it.
That's actually the same thing the Taoist people were telling me. Says we have absolutely no problem integrating the Western system. In fact, we believe we need to modify our system to make it better understood by the West. But there's just no interest. They don't want to. They don't want to hear us out.
Right. Well, it all comes from the pharmaceutical companies and their indoctrination. As you're probably aware, that one of their biggest budgetary expenses every year is in the billions of dollars. But that's for indoctrination of the doctors, not necessarily for oncology, but for all their various prescription drugs that, their boutique drugs here and there. Example would be Lipitor. I had a huge adverse reaction to Lipitor many, many years ago. And that's actually what started my knowledge of alternative medicine, because I couldn't tolerate the Lipitor and did have high cholesterol. I started looking for, supplements, alternatives that could be used. I started using one called red yeast rice. Huge clinical trials right out of China. By the way, I'm a Taoist, just so you know, since the science of Taoism keeps coming up. I'm a practicing Taoist. But that being said, as I was looking at the oncology issue, as well as 10 or 12 years ago, the high blood pressure issue, it was only the Chinese that were doing clinical trials, human clinical trials on many of these things. When it came to my quest in oncology, what started was finding clinical trials on curcumin, a substance that's been around for many years. It's a derivative of turmeric. It's much more powerful because it's a derivative, but it has efficacy on many things, including keeping cancer in abeyance. I don't think it can be considered a cure. But can it be a palliative? Yes, very much so. And once again, my doctors refused to even consider it. They basically humored me by saying, well, Bray, you can take 500 milligrams, which is not enough, and moving on. But this was the wedge that drove my inquiry, because as went curcumin, so went quercetin, so went resveratrol, and many, many other supplements that do have established clinical efficacy on cancer. The trick, unfortunately, becomes that cancer is very, very insidious. It is designed to kill you. That's what a cancer cell does. It's in your body. Its goal is to kill you. But it's a one-celled organism, and it can be dealt with one way or another. Now, it has to be dealt with, or it will indeed kill you. But Western medicine doesn't want to articulate the individual cancer regarding the individual patient. So what generally, sadly, happens in Western medicine is the cancer does come back. When I finished my chemo rounds and my surgery, that's basically what my oncologist told me. Cross your fingers and pray, Brett, that's the best we can do. Fortunately, along the way in my investigation, I was well aware that there was other things that I could do. And rather than argue with my oncologist, once again, he's a nice fellow, but he has blinders on the whole issue. I moved on with my own opportunities, and now I'm, knock on wood once again, doing reasonably well. Would I be doing as well if I had just followed my oncologist's advice of crossing my fingers and praying and buying a Bible? No, I would not be doing as well by any means. In fact, quite frankly, I would probably be in recurrence right now as opposed to in remission. So this becomes
you remind me of this Taoist medical guy, because he said, if your doctor is talking to you saying that you need to help to pray, he's going to be there to help you pray, you're going to have to pray because you're in big trouble. He used to joke about that medical pit saying you need to pray. He'd say, yeah, then you need to pray.
Yeah, no, and I can get your point, Dennis, but I got to be honest with you. I don't think it's very, I know that you're just being humorous for the show and all this, and I understand that. But to me, it's more criminal. It really is. I mean, we're dealing with, if you will, a form of genocide in and of itself.
Yes, of course.
We can digress back into COVID, but once again, they tried to create very quickly an mRNA vaccine that was collective, one size fits all. Well, I think anyone who's been objective or has at least followed the court cases subsequent and the testimony from Fauci, Redfield, and everybody else, we know that was a massive fraud, You can read Robert Kennedy's The Real Anthony Fauci. I highly recommend that book to all your listeners. It should be, de rigueur reading for everybody to start understanding not just Fauci's foibles, but also the foibles of the entire industry and why. It's an exemplary book. But my case is appropriate to that. They want to self-propagate a business model that is flawed, and that business model is killing literally. Last year, I think my research, I'm going from memory here, I think it was 4 million people in America died of cancer. I would argue from my research that if, in fact, Western medicine did preventative care, such as testing for cancer at a very, very early stage, and then if cancer is present, then dealing with palliative protocols, that cancer could be very, very limited in Western society. And the sad part is that a whole lot of people in Western medicine know exactly what I'm telling you, and they've decided not to pay attention. They've decided to abrogate their Hippocratic oath. They've decided to abrogate their MD and just move forward strictly on the Western model. It's criminal. It's absolutely criminal. And I'm writing on this now.
Actually, yes, I agree. I was joking, but yeah, on the other side, yes. Real quick then. The issue seems to me, you're talking about the allelopathic system here, allelopathy with Rockefeller going back to the 20s. And obviously it's a regime that is self-perpetuating regime that protects itself by the law, by, the FDA, like in 2017, 14 companies were warned and take their products confiscated. Anybody that tries to challenge this allelopathic system finds themselves in the crosshairs. Do we have any hope now with a Robert F. Kennedy coming in that we can start to change some of the dynamics of healthcare in America?
None whatsoever. As long as money talks in politics, the pharmaceutical companies will always be able to pick up the phone and get what they want when it comes to a congressional vote. Kennedy's great. I like him a lot. I've met him twice. I think he's a very good man. I followed his track record in environmental law as well. He's done some great work there. So I have great hope that within his department he will have the courage of his convictions and do very, very well. However, if he tries to affect legislation, which is what is needed, good luck, because he will run up against what the American public runs up against constantly, which is the unwillingness of their politicians to do anything that is in their own best interests. And we see that again and again regarding healthcare. I mean, it's the American model, it's the British model, it's the German model, it's the Spanish model, it's the French model. The politicians do what they want. And of course, we've seen that applied to Gaza, where, we can't even use the term genocide anymore because I guess the Oxford English Dictionary has had that page removed at this point.
Wow. Now, you mentioned earlier, you said Zionists. We would just call it Jewish control here on this show because it's bigger than just Zionism at this stage. But really, we're talking about a control group. Can you kind of feed the audience a little bit more what you were referring to when you first opened the segment?
Well, when I say Zionism, Zionism, in my mind, is not exclusively Jewish at all. In fact, in fairness, there are many Jews who don't agree with a Zionist platform, whether that be in Gaza or whether that be medically, socially, or otherwise. It moves into the banking industry, it moves into finance, it moves into media, obviously, it moves into so many aspects of society. But is it predominantly Jewish? Oh, absolutely. But if you will, it's an article that I wrote recently called The War for Your Mind. I mean, you have the Zionist entities basically trying to tell people of sound mind that their minds are inferior, whether that be medically or, in foreign policy issues such as Gaza. We're now told that, that we're infirm of mind if we think that, killing 40,000 people is is actually genocide. But within the medical community, you have basically the same thing. Your doctors become prostitutes. As I said earlier, some of these doctors, they know about alternative medicine. They know that they could open their minds. But they're not going to do that because their job basically is to self-propagate that same business model so that they stay wealthy, because a lot of these oncologists are making a lot of money by doing what they're supposed to do. It was interesting that, my current doctor was in private practice for many, many years, was actually Doctor of the Year as a family practitioner, and then of his own volition moved into alternative medicine applied to oncology. That's one of the reasons I respect him greatly, because, as I said earlier, he embraces both sides of the question to do the best that he can for the individual patient, which you won't find that. So in answer to your question, Zionism, as far as medicine is concerned, has been co-opted. The moralistic requirement of medicine the Hippocratic oath, the obligation to the patient has been removed. It's now obligation to profit. And if you will, that's Zionism in a nutshell, ignoring morality in favor of profit.
Isn't it true? I mean, I'm a little too young. Maybe you are too, but you do more research. Isn't it true that America had like a not-for-profit system up until like 1971 with Nixon?
Well, there was a degree of social services there that was brought to bear by Johnson more than Nixon, with the Great Society. As I like to say when I'm going after Trump or Obama or whomever, I haven't liked a president since Lyndon Johnson. But Lyndon Johnson had what was called political capital, which was built up from 32 years in the Congress and 16 or 14 years in the Senate, and 2 years as a vice president. He had that ability to get what he wanted. And if you ever go to Austin, Texas, and go to the LBJ Museum, you'll see the old political cartoons on the wall of LBJ literally riding on the backs of both the Republicans and the Democrats to get what he wanted. But he was able to do that because America at the time had money. It had money to spend. It could indeed engage social services because it had the financial ability to do that. And Johnson knew that. Johnson was a liberal at his heart. He was not a hypocrite like we see today, talking about social services and then doing just the opposite. He actually forced the Great Society, to bear upon the political system of America. And he was the one to do it. He was a disciple of Sam Rayburn. He knew exactly how to get what he wanted through not quid pro quo, as you see today, by literally grabbing his opponent by the balls and getting what he wanted for what was owed. So yes, there was a degree of social services being brought to bear at that time. The specifics of what you're talking about, I'm afraid I can't speak to that. I'm not familiar with it. But there was a time where there was more of an obligation to the American public, and that did trickle through Nixon, who did have political capital. There's no doubt about it. He had it in a slightly different way than Johnson. But this trickled down over the years to presidents having no political capital at all, just the ability to barter for what they want. And so we don't see social services at all. They're being gutted left and right in favor of war or profit within the healthcare system or what have you. But we're not seeing an obligation to the American public at all.
Yeah, we have about 3 minutes left, and then we have another guest coming on after. So we're going to have just the 3 minutes here, roughly 2.5. First, quickly give again your website so people can go to the website and the Substack.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. It's watchingromeburn.uk. And then my last name is Redmayne-Titley, Redmayne, then a hyphen or a dash, Titley at Substack. And Substack is an archive for all my work, as is Watching Rome Burn. I'm not really a blogger at all. Everything that you find was published by other news services, and I just keep an archive for records.
Very good. I know that my archive just nuked something like 5 years of my records just recently of my radio shows. 5 years. He just deleted it. 2014 to 2019, something like that. Okay. Last thing then is, okay, where do we go from here on the health side? Obviously, I find Kennedy to be a net plus. Obviously, you said a lot of good things, but where do we go from here in the States? Health-wise, how do we change the system or make the system a little bit more responsive to the needs of the people, especially owing to the fact that we see so many cancers on the rise, which many attribute to the COVID vaccine?
Well, we have to come together from a standpoint of education on many things, including healthcare. I believe in what Nelson Mandela said many, many years ago: education is the greatest power you can have if you want to change the world. What I've just told you in the last 30 minutes, I imagine that very, very few people know about. And I do encourage your listeners to contact me. I will be happy to share what I know, because I have a series that just started a week ago as I'm going through sort of a live on-scene report, but trying to highlight that on-scene report with what I've garnered, as I mentioned, through my research, and offer that as an aid to people who do have cancer, so that perhaps they can have the same good fortune as I may have had as well. But I think it has to be education, because a guy like, say, Kennedy cannot be respected unless you understand the other side of that information, and can therefore garner respect for Kennedy.
So I guess with that, dude, I don't know. We got about 20 seconds to go. Anything else you want to add?
I'm just glad to be on. I appreciate the forum and a chance to speak with your listeners and get that word out. Whether we're talking about Ukraine, same thing. Education is the key, and I'm glad to be listened to, because we in the journalist world we tend to be rather isolated, and we tend to want march on as soldiers, trying to do our best work on behalf of everyone else. So it's always rewarding to be on a show like yours, where I can bring that information to bear and possibly help.
All right, you can hear that. There's the music. Okay, thanks so much, Brett, for coming on. Everybody, back with more right after this.